Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today. We'll get started in just a minute. All right. Just want to make sure I have everything in order here. And it is a minute after 10, so we will go ahead and get started. I'm so excited to have you all here with me this morning for our webinar today, which is called Self-Care for the Advocate, Recognizing and Preventing Burnout and Compassion Fatigue. I think this is just such an important topic, especially right now with everything going on with COVID-19 and quarantining and working the front lines. So I hope this will be an opportunity for you all to, if you're working from home, have a little something different going on in your morning. If you are working the front lines in shelter or in another workspace, I hope this will offer you some support and encouragement and care and to show our gratitude for all the work that you're all doing right now. Okay, so my name is Alexis Champion, and I'm the training manager at the Georgia Coalition Against Domestic Violence. This is my contact info, and I will share this again at the end. If you have any questions, feedback, comments, would you like more resources, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. So let's do a little bit of housekeeping before we jump into our content this morning. I want to make sure you all can hear me. I am working from home, so this is a slightly different setup than what I usually have in my office. So hopefully technology will be on our side this morning and everything will work as it should. So if you can hear me now, I'd like for you to find the little hand icon there on the right-hand side of your screen and just click that to raise your hand for me so I know that the audio is working this morning. I see hands going up. Thank you so much. Great. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and lower all of your hands. So in case you have a question later, I will be able to tell. So if you're having any technical problems, the best thing to do is contact global customer support for GoToWebinar. If you want to jot down this number or this web address, you can copy and paste it. If you have issues that you feel are based on the software, you can reach out to these two resources for help. You're also welcome to type in questions into the chat box. You should see your chat box there at the bottom right-hand side of your screen. And I will be checking periodically for questions and pausing for questions, but please don't feel like you have to wait for a pause if a question comes up. I will be checking that. And again, just bear with me this morning because I am managing all of this by myself. So I'll be presenting the content and also trying to answer your questions. So I may pause to read questions or take a look and see and make sure everything is going smoothly for everyone. So also, if you'll notice there on the right-hand side of your screen, I've uploaded 3 handouts that you're welcome to go ahead and open up and download if you'd like. You won't have to follow along with them during the presentation, so don't feel like you have to do that. But if you're curious and you want to check them out, you're welcome to. I will be referring to them. And I will be emailing everybody at the end of the webinar, either later today or early next week. I will send out all of these handouts as an attachment, plus some additional resources and a survey to get your feedback on the webinar today. And also, I will send you a copy of these slides, a handout version of these slides. So If there's information in the slides that you're eager to write down and you miss it, don't worry, you will be getting a copy of these. All right, I think that is everything for housekeeping. We'll go ahead and get started. So some learning objectives for today. We're going to talk about why self-care is important. You know, this is something that we talk a lot about, being in helping professions as advocates working with survivors, especially. We're sharing and hearing and listening to a lot of trauma and traumatic experiences, in addition to just the natural fatigue that can occur when we're working in positions where we're caring for others. So it may seem kind of obvious, but I think the point that I want to make here is that it's truly an essential part of being a good advocate. Yes, it's great for us to take care of ourselves because we are worth it and we matter. It's also an important part of our work, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. We're also going to be defining burnout, compassion fatigue, and vicarious trauma. I think these terms often get used interchangeably. We think they kind of mean the same thing. We use one or the other without really thinking about what they mean. But there is a difference between these three things, and that matters because the more we can understand what our specific experiences are or where those feelings are coming from, that will help us to better identify what the solution needs to be. And talking about solutions, we're going to spend some time talking about how to identify solutions to both prevent and heal from burnout and compassion fatigue. You can come back from burnout and compassion fatigue. It doesn't mean that you can't work as an advocate anymore. So we'll talk about what that looks like. And finally, if we have time, I have some information that I'd like to share with you. It is one of the handouts that I've uploaded to talk a little bit about worry. This is something that it's a resource that my therapist shared with me recently. Yes, I have a therapist. I highly recommend it for everybody. And it talks about worrying, especially right now, again, with this crisis going on, and how worry feels in our bodies, what's normal worry versus what's excessive, and a little bit about how to manage worry. So I'm excited to share some of that information with you. All right. So why are we talking about this? Why are we talking about self-care? Again, domestic violence advocacy and taking care of others is really difficult work. Think about, when you're meeting somebody for the first time and they ask what you do for a living. What are some of the reactions that you get from people? And as I ask these questions, feel free to, I'd love to get your answers throughout this presentation. It's always more fun if this can be interactive. So type into the chat box when you're meeting somebody at a party or at a barbecue or, at church or wherever, and they're like, oh, what do you do? And you say, oh, I work in a domestic violence shelter or outreach office or legal advocacy office. What kind of responses do you get from people? One person said they begin to tell their story. Yeah, that's like, we have to be prepared that once we open that up, folks could share their experiences with us. Another person said, oh, wow, I could never do that. That's hard work. Absolutely. I get a lot of those responses of like, oh my gosh, I don't know how you do that, or you must be a saint, or thank you so much. And one person said a lot of times people will walk away. Yeah, it's a lot, right? Like that's not something that comes up in casual conversation very often. One person shared that about a year ago, they started saying that they do management at a nonprofit as a form of self-care. That way you don't have to talk about work away from work. Oh, what a great idea. I love that. So yeah, you can choose whether or not to disclose you work in domestic violence. If that's not what you want the focus of the conversation to be right then, yeah, say you work in nonprofit management. That's a brilliant suggestion. Another person said they say bless you and that they could not do that kind of work. Exactly. So the point here is that this is really hard work, and there is a good reason why we get these reactions from people, because it really does take a special kind of person to go to work every day knowing that you're going to be hearing some of the most awful, horrific details of abuse that humans can do to each other, and that's exhausting and it's hard work. So that's a big part of why self-care is so important. So the other thing about this is that not taking care of ourselves can have a negative impact on our health and on our personal life. For my folks on the webinar today who've been doing this for a while, I know you know what that feels like and looks like. It's hard to leave work at work. It's hard to go home at the end of the day and not have the emotions that have come up through the day impact how we interact with our family members or our friends. I can remember when I first started working in the shelter, and you'd go to work all week and you'd look forward to the weekend and going out with your friends and having a drink, or, we'd sit out in somebody's backyard and have a little campfire and hang out and relax, and everybody be telling stories and laughing, and then they'd get to me and be like, so what was your week like? And I was always the Debbie Downer, my stories. Sometimes they could be funny, because working with people can be funny sometimes, but overall it was, and again, with confidentiality, I couldn't share a lot of the details of what I was doing. So that's hard too. But the other thing that I think that sometimes we forget about is that compassion fatigue and burnout can have a negative impact on the survivors that we work with. And I can also share with you all that this is something, as an advocate working in a shelter, I did not recognize how much burnout and compassion fatigue I was experiencing until I made some pretty bad mistakes. And for those of you that have attended our frontline training, you may have heard me tell this story before. I worked in a shelter for about 8 years. I was legal advocate for a little while, and I was the case manager, the only case manager in the shelter, for about 5 years. And towards the end of that time, before I transitioned to the coalition as a trainer, we had a woman come in to the shelter, and she came in from an area of town that we called Tent City, where we knew homeless folks lived. And I just made a lot of assumptions about her. I assumed that she was homeless and that domestic violence wasn't really her primary concern. And then one of the first things she asked me during case management is if we could fill a prescription for pain pills for her. And so then I made another assumption that, okay, this explains it. This is why she's here. She's trying to get these pain pills, which, hey, could have been certainly part of her truth. And I didn't kick her out. I didn't, share any of these thoughts with her. But I know that I didn't work as hard as I could have to provide her with emotional support, to ask her questions about the abuse that she experienced, and to send a message that she was welcome in our program no matter what. To top that off, another resident who was staying at the shelter at the same time, went out with her one day and was surprised that this woman's plan for the day was to stand at a corner with a sign that said, "Homeless, please help," at like a busy intersection. And the survivor who, stumbles into this experience is alarmed and not feeling really safe standing on the street corner, and angry that this woman who is in a shelter getting food, getting clothing, getting other resources would do this. So she comes back and tells me, and, I try to be objective and professional and say, I'm sorry you had that experience, just encourage you not to go out with her during the day anymore. But, I had my own feelings about that coming up. And if I'm honest, I was like, oh gosh, yeah, figures, So she stayed for a couple of weeks and then she left on her own. And I thought, well, that's that. About a month after that, I came into work one day and she had called our crisis line from the hospital. because she'd been attacked by her abuser, who was also homeless and lived with her in Tent City. And she was pretty badly injured. And it was just a real wake-up call for me to realize, I'd sort of gotten to this point of being pretty cynical and negative and just kind of assuming the worst about people. Those are all symptoms of burnout and compassion fatigue. We'll talk a little bit more about, other examples of what those symptoms look like as we move on. But the point here being that if we're not taking care of ourselves, if we're experiencing excessive burnout or compassion fatigue or vicarious trauma, we're not going to be able to connect with and build those relationships with the survivors that we're trying to serve, because that burnout gets in the way. So the definition of compassion is a feeling of deep sympathy and sorrow for another who is stricken by suffering or misfortune, accompanied by a strong desire to alleviate the pain or remove the cause. So for, I think, many of us, we come to this work because we are naturally compassionate and empathetic people. And so what that means is that our sensitivity and our understanding, our desire to help others, the sorrow that we feel for them, makes us compassionate and effective advocates, but it also makes us really vulnerable to pain. It is true that, it sometimes doesn't really work really well to tell somebody that you understand how they feel, because we can't really ever understand someone else's lived experience. However, I feel your pain is a true statement, especially for people who are particularly empathetic or compassionate. We do feel other people's pain. That does have an impact on us, not just in an intellectual way of hearing the story, but how we feel and the pain that we carry. We experience a little bit of that trauma every time we hear that traumatic story. Okay, so let's break down these terms a little bit. We have burnout, which is a psychological term used to describe the experience of long-term exhaustion and diminished interest. Then we have compassion fatigue, which is that fatigue that occurs when we have a constant demand of caring for others, and we either become distressed, overly distressed, and hard to regulate our emotions, or we become apathetic. So we can think about it as a spectrum as far as how people react to compassion fatigue. Sometimes we become overly emotional. You cry at the drop of a hat. Everything is really upsetting, even the Hallmark commercial on TV. Or we kind of shut down and we shut ourselves off from those emotions because it becomes overwhelming. We have fatigue from constantly feeling those feelings, and so we practice self-preservation by cutting them off. And then we have secondary traumatic stress disorder. This can also be called vicarious trauma, and this is more of a clinical term. But it is similar to post-traumatic stress disorder in that it's really impacting your daily life. So it's not just that you're feeling a little sad, it's hard to get out of bed in the morning. It becomes hard to function. You have intrusive thoughts. You have trouble sleeping, other things like that. So secondary or vicarious trauma is very similar to compassion fatigue, but heightened. It's getting to the point where it's interrupting daily life. So what is the difference between compassion fatigue and burnout? Compassion fatigue is, again, emotional strain resulting of the exposure to working with those who've suffered a lot of traumatic events. And it can occur due to exposure on one particular case, or the cumulative, just hearing those stories day in and day out. I think about how many crisis calls you answer in a day, or how many intakes you do with survivors, or how many ex parte orders, petitions you're filling out, helping folks get protective orders. This differs from burnout, although they can coexist. So what is burnout? Burnout is, again, exhaustion or withdrawal associated with increased workload and institutional stress, and it is not trauma related. So burnout can occur in any profession, and I think that's the real difference, that anyone can experience burnout. You don't have to be working in a helping profession. I think it's more often seen in any helping profession, whether it's first responders like EMTs or firefighters, or social workers working the front lines, certainly social workers working in particularly bureaucratic structures like DFACs or court systems, where you don't have a lot of control over how things work or what kinds of services are provided or how we're working with people. But again, burnout can happen to anyone. It can happen to bankers, it can happen to lawyers, it can happen to doctors. It's not limited to advocates, and it's not caused by trauma. And we're going to talk a little bit about what does cause burnout next. So the first thing is workload, having too much work and or limited resources. Raise your hand if you feel like you have too much work to do and not enough resources to get your work done. I think that's a pretty common feeling in any nonprofit work. We're constantly working from what we call a scarcity model, where it feels like we never have enough. We never have enough time. We never have enough copy paper. We never have enough shampoo. We never have enough money to provide hotel stays or first month's rent. And that's stressful. It's stressful to have this demand when you don't have the resources to meet them, whether it's actual services to provide to survivors or technology. I mean, I've worked in a lot of different programs over the years, and there was a wide variety of resources provided. You know, we are told as nonprofit managers that we have to be thrifty. So I worked at one program that would use the back of those ads that would come through the fax machine, like for cruises and stuff. We would use that as printer paper instead of buying new packages of paper, you know, things like that. So it always sends this message that there's just not enough resources. Another cause of burnout is control or lack of control. And so this is when someone is experiencing a lot of micromanagement or not having a lot of decision-making power. And again, this can happen in any workplace. I think when we're talking about domestic violence programs, you know, sometimes there may be micromanagement going on as far as someone being told how they should interact with a survivor. Or whether or not to let someone into shelter, whether or not someone is given an extension, whether or not they're given financial assistance. If you're in a position where you're the one as an advocate working directly with survivors, so they're coming to you with these questions, but you don't have the ability to make those decisions, that can be really stressful. It can lead to burnout. And that's just one example. There's a lot of different ways that micromanagement can show up, not just on the front lines. Another cause of burnout is reward. So inconsistent and or lack of pay, acknowledgement, or benefits. So I know that I don't think any of us decided to come work in domestic violence because we thought we were going to make our fortunes and retire early, right? Like, we all signed up for this knowing that domestic violence advocates don't get paid a ton of money. We rely on grants and donations. So most of the time, we are often just making a little bit more than the survivors that we're working with. But it's not just about the annual salary amount or the paycheck amount. Programs, and so to my leadership on the webinar today, just be rest assured that this isn't saying you have to pay really high salaries to prevent burnout. Acknowledgement and benefits can come through in a lot of different ways, in a lot of creative ways. And just saying thank you, just saying I notice the hard work you do, I appreciate the hard work you do, goes a long way. But it could be other things like having really generous vacation time, or having holiday bonuses, or health savings accounts, employee assistance programs. So there's a way to make a dollar go pretty far to show appreciation that isn't just about a pay raise. Another cause of burnout is when there are problems within the workplace community. So what this looks like is when one person is experiencing isolation or a lot of conflict, or feeling disrespected by coworkers or supervisors. And we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go on, but for each of these different causes or categories, they could be experienced by one person within the organization who is kind of not really fitting into the organizational culture, or it could be that you have multiple people who are experiencing these issues. And so sometimes these are issues within the organization itself that the organization needs to fix. Sometimes it's just that that particular individual, again, isn't really fitting into the culture, that the way things are set up works for most of the employees, and you just kind of have one outlier that may not be a good fit. So it can go both ways. Other causes of burnout, fairness. So when there's a lot of discrimination going on, or staff is noticing that leadership favors one particular person over others. Maybe the director is good friends with the finance person, and they go out to lunch all the time, and it seems like she always gets first pick on vacation days and things like that. There's a lot of different ways, again, that could show up. Values. So again, this is, if an employee is witnessing ethical conflicts, so maybe they're disagreeing with decisions that are being made about who to serve and how to provide those services. Maybe they feel like they're being assigned meaningless tasks. They're being asked to organize the linen closet over and over again. Or maybe their beliefs and values just don't align with the agency's mission. So one example of this is for most domestic violence programs who are state certified shelters receiving federal funding, we have to be secular organizations. We can't promote one particular faith or religious belief over another. We can't pray with our clients. We can't, proselytize or, hand them a Bible and say, hey, I really suggest that you read this. And for some folks whose faith is a big part of what is leading them to be an advocate, that can be really hard. The good news is that there are faith-based organizations where that can be a part of the work. So again, it may just be that it's a mismatch, that this person just really doesn't agree with the idea that they can't bring their faith into their work as an advocate. And so maybe they would be a better fit at a different type of agency. Or it could be that it's, again, organization-wide, that there are a lot of practices that the agency has put into place that don't align with the agency's mission statement. That can lead to burnout for staff. Supervision is another cause, and this is simply just not receiving enough support or training, not having enough guidance or leadership or conversations around how to do the job. And then the last one is the role in the organization. So if a person is not sure or not confident of what their current role is, do they have a copy of their job description? Do they know how they're being measured? That can be really stressful if I come to work every day and I don't know whether or not I'm doing a good job because I'm not quite sure what my job is supposed to be. If that goes on for too long, that can certainly lead to burnout. So any thoughts, any questions about these different causes? Remember, you can always type your question into the chat box, and I will be checking that periodically. And so again, it's important to remember that with all of these causes, it could be that the individual person is experiencing one or many of these and is just not a great fit perhaps for that particular organization. Or it could be that multiple staff are experiencing one or more of these, and that it really is if the organization could make some changes on how they provide supervision, or bringing those policies and procedures more in line with their mission, that it could go a long way in solving problems of preventing burnout and ultimately also preventing compassion fatigue. Okay. So what are some signs of burnout and compassion fatigue? And here I am going to combine these because while they are different things, the signs and symptoms look very similar. And so it can be hard. I will add here that one of the handouts that I gave you is an article on burnout where I pulled these different categories and causes from. And at the end of that article is a little very brief self-evaluation where you can answer some questions and consider whether or not you may be experiencing any of those causes in your own workplace. And again, just thinking about, what's going on, what's contributing to that. So just wanted you to be aware of that resource. Okay, so some of the signs and symptoms that we're going to be looking for. And so just take a minute to think of an example. Obviously, we can't put you into groups on a webinar, but if you want to just type into the chat box, you can pick any one of these. So we've got physical signs, emotional signs, behavioral signs, interpersonal signs, so how we're getting along with other folks, and then work-related signs. So this is, think of issues with productivity. So just take a minute and see if you can come up with an example that would fit into one of these categories. These are signs of burnout and or compassion fatigue. Okay, so let's see. Scroll back up. We've got a physical sign could be just being really tired, absolutely. Being irritable with changes in shelter or policies that aren't explained well, absolutely. Less patience than is normal for oneself. And that's a great point too. With all of these signs, one of the warning signs you want to look for in yourself or in others is a change. So if I'm naturally, a sleepy person, that's not necessarily a warning sign of burnout. But if I'm suddenly feeling a lot more tired than I normally do, that is something to be paying attention to. Being snappy. Physical signs may include body aches. Yeah, sometimes those physical signs aren't super obvious that's what's causing them. Headaches, body aches, feeling sore, feeling nervous. One person said work-related could be calling out of work more frequently, showing up late, leaving early, absolutely. Fatigue, not being motivated anymore, Some emotional signs could be sad or depressed, mood changes, absolutely. Anxiety and headaches. Just disconnected with the guests or survivors. Yeah, that's definitely a warning sign to pay attention to, because that's when we're trying to protect ourselves by not connecting with survivors. That's a great example of how burnout and compassion fatigue get in the way of the work. Avoiding tasks, increased anxiety, missing questions from the victims that you're working with. One person says, as far as emotional and work related, I find myself getting super short or easily upset over things that normally would be annoying but not worth my anger. Absolutely, great example. Not sleeping well, having difficulty sleeping or staying asleep. Absolutely. Quick to leave work. Yeah, if we're watching the clock and you're like, okay, as soon as my shift is over, I am out of the door every day, that's a warning sign. There are going to be days. We're all going to have days where we feel like that. That's okay. That's normal. Is it every day? Is it getting worse than it was before? Work starts to decrease in productivity and creativity. That's a great example. Yeah, it's like if you're just dialing it in, right? If you're just showing up and doing the bare minimum, but not really thinking about how things can be pushed forward or changed or improved, that can be a sign of burnout. Easily frustrated, sarcastic, or apathetic. Yeah, absolutely. These are great examples. Thank you guys so much. Okay. So some other physical signs. I think you got a lot of these. Yeah, trouble sleeping, fatigue, changes in appetite. I wish I was one of those people who ate less when I was stressed, but unfortunately that's not my reality. I find myself snacking more often, stress eating. But it's different for everybody. Some folks can't eat when they're stressed or burned out. Others may eat more or eat more junk food. Stomach problems and or muscle pains, hair loss and problems with skin. Wow, these are not fun things, right? Just an impaired immune response, so getting sick a lot, catching everything that comes through the office, whereas before, um, you know, you felt like you didn't get sick as often. These are all things to work for. And again, we're talking about changes. So, if this is something that you didn't really experience or deal with when you first started working in domestic violence, but you're seeing these changes in yourself or in a coworker, I think it's important that we want to show compassion to each other too. And so, instead of just making an assumption that a coworker is always late because they don't have a good work ethic or they don't care about their coworkers, just consider, is this a change for this person? Did they used to be on time? And is there something going on? All right, so some emotional signs, changes in personality, feeling powerless, overwhelmed, or depleted. And I think that's so important for what we're going through right now, because we don't have any control over this virus. We don't have any control beyond practicing social distancing and washing our hands of when things get better. And that really contributes to the stress and the trauma and the exhaustion of times like these. It can make it really difficult to concentrate. We may start to doubt ourselves and wonder, am I really cut out for this? Am I a good advocate? Just having a lot of self-doubt or guilt, feeling like I'm just not working hard enough. I should be staying late every day. All the way to feeling real depression and anxiety. And that may require professional help, and that's okay. So some behavioral signs, crying easily or more often, being like either overly sensitive or not sensitive at all. So again, it's that spectrum. For some folks, it could be just overreacting to everything or just shrugging everything off. If you notice yourself when you're answering the crisis line, for example, and a survivor has told you their story about the abuse they've experienced, and you're just kind of numb to it, you're checking off boxes and sort of half listening, take note of that. Because what happens is when we're experiencing burnout and compassion fatigue, and we start that self-protection process of disconnecting, it can really show. And that self-preservation is there for a reason. It's not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself. It's when it's coming through in our tone of voice, or how supportive we are to the survivor, that we need to check ourselves and say, okay, do I need to take a step back for a minute? Do I need to find somebody to talk to? And the first step really is practicing that self-awareness and being willing to take a look at ourselves and say, am I behaving in this way and why? What's going on with me right now? This is how I'm showing up to the survivors I'm serving. It could also be that we're easily angered or stressed, aggressive or controlling. One thing about uncertain times, chaotic times, traumatic times, is that sometimes in order to try to get control back of the situation, we may become super controlling. And so I think that it makes perfect sense to me why some shelter programs will fall back on having really strict rules or policies and procedures. It is a part of that self-preservation of believing, okay, if we have a 6 p.m. curfew, then nothing bad's going to happen and my job won't be stressful. Unfortunately, the reality is that those rules very rarely accomplish that goal. But we do these things because we're trying to get that control back to protect ourselves from stress and trauma. So we constantly, again, have to be practicing that self-awareness of why am I behaving this way? Where is it coming from? Are we having unrealistic expectations for ourselves or for others? Are we blaming folks, blaming ourselves, being super judgmental? What I was describing in my story at the beginning, I got to that place where I was really pessimistic and really cynical. I didn't get really rigid, necessarily, but what I was doing was just assuming the worst, assuming that everybody was going to lie to me, assuming that, domestic violence wasn't really their primary concern. And that was something that I wasn't seeing in myself until it interfered with my ability to help that particular survivor. Another behavior sign to look for is substance use to cope or numb those emotions that are coming up. So again, there's nothing wrong with having an occasional drink or whatever the case may be. It's that change in behavior. And if you find yourself that is your only coping mechanism and it's becoming excessive or getting in the way of being able to get things done, that it could be a sign of a problem. So some interpersonal signs: unable to focus, withdrawing socially. If we begin to lose our sense of humor, we just avoid interactions, we become less intimate or less trustful. And this isn't just in the workplace, right? This is why this is worrisome, is because this can carry over into our home lives, into our personal lives with friends and family. So these are important things to keep an eye out for. Work-related signs: low morale, just being super negative, avoiding tasks, not doing as good a job as we used to. Y'all shared some of these examples of, calling out of work a lot, or being constantly late when I wasn't a person who was late originally. Taking a lot of risks, And sometimes that could be, again, on that other end of the spectrum, that person who is, constantly not maintaining good work boundaries. Maybe they are the one who always volunteers to drive survivors to appointments. And at first it seems really helpful, but then it's like, is there something else that they're avoiding? Or are they maybe having too much contact with survivors? Are things getting too personal? Are they taking on the weight of one person's entire goals and things they're trying to accomplish by really trying to do everything for them or with them? And that can be somewhat risky. So this is just a funny cartoon to kind of sum all this up. This is a stress management clinic that has a little sign on the door that says, "Sorry, closed due to burnout." I've had this cartoon for a very long time, and it's always made me chuckle a little bit. Obviously, we are in the business of helping people survive traumatic experiences. So if we are not practicing self-care and managing our own vicarious trauma, we don't want to have to say that we're closed due to that. But honestly, this cartoon took on a whole other light in this current situation that brought me a little bit of sadness when I was looking over these slides. I know that we are open and we are providing services, but it's looking a little different right now. Working remotely, trying to still help folks from a safe distance. All right, any questions or comments or thoughts about all of those symptoms before we move on to talk about some solutions? All right. So what do we do with all of this information? So again, remembering that burnout and compassion fatigue are going to look similar. It may be hard to differentiate between the symptoms. It's the root causes that are different for these two things. And so the solutions look different. And that's why it's important to kind of, if you're having some of those symptoms, do some self-reflection to figure out, what is the root cause for you? That article that I shared with you with that little self-assessment is a great tool. There's also a checklist for self-care practices that can help you to do some self-reflection and think about what may be coming up for you. And in the email that I send out, I'm going to send out some more resources along those lines as well. So when we're talking about solutions for burnout, remember, these are organizational issues or challenges that are coming up. So this is not about trauma. This is not about working directly with survivors or helping people. This is about the workplace environment and issues and challenges that are going on there. And again, it could be that the organization has some challenges and issues, so that you've got a lot of staff who are experiencing similar problems, that if the organization tackled those problems, could be worked out. Other times it's going to be that you have an individual staff person who, for whatever reason, is not a great fit for that particular organization's structure. And it could be as simple as changing that person's role within the organization could solve a lot of the problems. So the first thing is always to talk to your supervisor. With organizational challenges, these things can often be fixed. Sometimes we get stuck in that place of negativity. If you find yourself going to a coworker every day to complain or vent about something going on in the workplace, stop and ask yourself, have I done anything to try to solve this problem? There is nothing wrong with venting. Venting is healthy. It's important. We're all going to do it. No job is perfect. No organization is perfect. But I just want to encourage you to step back and say, all right, if I'm going to be solution focused right now, what could I do to try to solve this problem? A lot of times, if there are organizational things going on that are creating these issues, Leadership may not be aware of it because all the advocates are maybe experiencing it, complaining with each other, but they haven't taken it to leadership to say, this is not working for us. Be that person that's brave. Take it to your supervisor. It may be something that can be changed or fixed. Another solution is to ask for supportive supervision. And I'm happy to provide you with more resources if you're curious to learn more about supervision best practices. We have a lot of resources on what we call reflective supervision. So we all, because we work in domestic violence, should have supervisors who help us practice self-reflection. That's a phrase you've heard me say a lot today on this webinar, that if I'm not aware of what's going on with me, I'm not going to catch these warning signs and I'm not going to catch the causes. And it's a huge help to have a supervisor who says to me, I noticed that you've been coming in late a lot the last couple of weeks. Is there something going on? Is there something that you want to talk about? Rather than just like writing me up or, again, brushing it off as me just not being a great employee. It's, challenging us to have these conversations, normalize these conversations about, is this burnout or compassion fatigue, and what changes need to happen to help with that. Another solution for burnout is to appropriately reach out to coworkers. Again, no one understands what we're going through better than the folks who work beside us every day. So supporting each other, encouraging each other, talking things out, those are all great practices that can help a lot. Another way to prevent burnout is to attend trainings regularly. Because remember, we talked about you can lose that sense of creativity or productiveness, and sometimes just getting some new information can help revitalize those efforts and give us a fresh perspective. Another solution can be just to take some time away from work. Work-life balance is so important. And in the resource I sent you about worrying, they talk a lot about that. That a really great way to manage worry and to manage burnout as well is we have to have work-life balance. We have to have things in our lives that bring us joy. And that's also a great way to prevent and heal from compassion fatigue as well. If the only thing we're thinking about doing, if we eat, sleep, breathe domestic violence advocacy, we're going to burn out and we're going to experience compassion fatigue. We have to have balance. We have to have other things that fill our cups back up. So don't be the person that competes with your coworkers to see how many vacation days you can save up. Those are not good practices. I've worked in places where it was like a competition or a badge of honor to be like, oh yeah, I haven't taken any of my vacation days or any of my sick days this year. We have those days for a reason, and they need to be taken. They need to be used. Another solution is to practice self-check-ins. So whether it's using one of the tools that I'm going to share with you, or just sitting down and journaling, or talking to somebody, just check in to say, where am I at? And has it changed from my first day on the job versus now? Am I still showing up for survivors the way I want to show up? Am I still being the kind of advocate I want to be? Am I experiencing any of these symptoms, and where might they be coming from? So we have a question. I find my cases popping into my mind after work or on the weekends. What can I do about this? That is a really great question, and you are certainly not alone with that. That is one of the hardest things. Oh my gosh, when I was working as a case manager, I would find myself, the shower for me, for some reason, was the time when all of these thoughts would come flooding into my head, and I would just be cranking the wheels, trying to figure out, like, okay, I'm going to go in today and I'm going to say this one thing to this person that's going to convince them not to go back to their abusive partner. I would fret and worry about this at the most inconvenient times. You say it's the car for you. Yeah, it's like when we're alone with our thoughts, suddenly all of these things come flooding in. So one of the greatest tips I've received on this is to be intentional and mindful in how you end your day or your shift at work. So it's a really great practice to build into your shift time to debrief at the end. So take the last 15 minutes of your time at work. Do you have a coworker or a supervisor or someone where you can build in the habit of passing the baton, passing the information, or just getting it off your chest? You know, here's what was really hard for me today. Here was something that went really well today that felt like a big success. I, really connected with this person that I hadn't connected with before. She really opened up to me, or I feel like I didn't help this person like I wanted to, and I regret what I said. Whatever it is, whatever came up in the day, at the end of your shift or the end of your workday, create space and time to get it out, and say, okay, I've gotten it out, I've said it, I've shared, and I'm going to leave it here, and I'm going to come back the next day. Another practice is meditation. So a lot of time when I first, thought about practicing meditation, I'd kind of roll my eyes because I'm like, I am not, some sort of yogi guru. Like, how am I supposed to know how to meditate? Meditation is a lot, it's both a lot harder than I realized, but a lot simpler than I realized. And there's a lot of great apps out there, and we'll talk more about some ideas for that. We talk about other solutions, but it's just the process of over and over and over again clearing your mind. And if you find yourself taking work home with you, fretting over survivors, trying to problem solve, having those intrusive thoughts, don't be hard on yourself that that's happening. Simply redirect and say, I'm not going to think about this right now because I'm not at work. What can I think about instead? Am I going to think about fuzzy bunnies, or the funny cat picture I saw online, or my sister's wedding coming up, or whatever I've got going on? The thing is, those intrusive thoughts are going to keep coming back and keep coming back. And every time they do, just redirect, redirect, redirect. And don't get hard on yourself that keeps happening. That's normal. But the more you can get in the habit of learning how to redirect those thoughts, the easier it will get and the less it will happen over time. Another question that we have is, how do you get yourself to be more productive again when working? I find myself having too much stuff to do and then getting too overwhelmed so that I don't get much done. Oh my gosh, that is a great question. I'm really feeling that pain right now, trying to work from home, because I just don't have things organized the way I like them. And so, I get up in the morning and I'm like, okay, I'm going to get things done today, but I don't have it organized. And so I get overwhelmed quicker, I think, than I usually do. So, and, feel free as I'm sharing these questions, if you have good answers, because I know I'm not the only one with great ideas, feel free to type them into the chat box and I'll share them with everybody. But I think one way that I would answer that question, or a suggestion, would be make a to-do list. I try to make a to-do list for the week. You may want to make a to-do list for the day, and prioritize. Decide what is the most important thing, that if you don't get anything else done that day, that's the thing you need to get done, and start there. You won't get through your to-do list, and that's okay. But I find that just structuring my day a little bit, as far as taking a minute to think about what needs to get done and what's most important, helps me to feel more productive. One person has shared, I have coworkers who say that work is their self-care. Yes, I have heard that too. And I worry about those folks because, again, work-life balance is so important. So one thing I'd say to that is, how would you encourage a survivor to practice self-care? And if we are not leading by example, then we're not going to be able to provide great advice on this. You would never want a survivor that you're working with to not have balance in their lives, to not have things that bring them joy outside of their workplace. So what can you do to lead by example, and find some other things that fill your cup back up besides work? I mean, don't get me wrong, I greatly appreciate those folks who are so super dedicated and passionate about the work. It takes that level of dedication and passion to show up to this job every day. But I would encourage you, to think about what brings you balance, what brings you joy. All right. So let's talk about some solutions for compassion fatigue. And these look a little different. They're similar, but again, the cause is coming from a different place. So it's about practicing reflection on an ongoing basis. Preventing or healing from compassion fatigue is not a quick fix. It's more about the habits that we develop in our work. So practicing self-reflection, thinking about how we're showing up as advocates. Are we showing up the way we wanted to when we first started in this work? Are we practicing self-care, and how? Are we setting healthy boundaries? Taking notice if we had coping skills that used to work for us that maybe aren't working as much anymore. Definitely picking your battles, and that goes with coworkers and supervisors and working with survivors, all of those things. What is something that's going to stick and really be something you're going to fight for or against, and what's maybe something you can let go. And it's super important to find joy and humor in your work. It's okay to laugh at work. This is really hard work, and we're dealing with really horrific situations. And that's why it's all the more important. I mean, I tell you guys, my best friends in this world, for the most part, besides my best friend from college, are people that I have worked with, advocates that I've worked with, that became such an important part of my life. I would not be here today if it hadn't been for those people that brought me joy. And I have never laughed harder than I have laughed with some of those amazing coworkers over the years. All right, I'm just reviewing questions for a minute before we move on. One question we have is, what if you work in an environment where one is being dominant in the office? How do you cope with that? It's a stress factor on top of what we already face. That is a great question. And I think always one of the biggest challenges is when, because just like any workplace, there's going to be different personalities. And again, I think folks come to this work with different attitudes and approaches. And if you're working with somebody who is being super dominant in that way, wow, it's kind of going against everything we believe in having safe and healthy relationships, because those kind of dominant personalities can be pretty controlling. So again, I think practicing healthy boundaries. For me personally, I struggle with being assertive because I don't want to be dominant. I don't want to be aggressive. I tend not to voice my opinions at all. And when you're working with someone who is dominant like that, it's even harder to be assertive. There is a great book that I will recommend to you on assertiveness. So I will share that in the email that I send out. I don't have the title in front of me right now. But I think practicing healthy boundaries, and again, pick your battles. What is non-negotiable and what is something that you can let slide? Because with any personality conflict, no matter what it is, we have to always remember that we don't have any control over that other person and their choices and how they're going to show up. We can only control how we react to them. And so it's going to be thinking about what's going to be most productive as far as what you do have control over. And boundaries is what comes to mind for me. when to say no, when to stand your ground, and not back down. Great questions. Thank you. Okay. So I'd like to take a moment to share some other self-care strategies. So take a minute to think about what you do to take care of yourself. And it can be, as far as preventing burnout or compassion fatigue, it can be in any of those categories. It doesn't matter. I would just love to share some of your amazing ideas and practices. So take a minute to think about how you take care of yourself, what strategies are the most helpful to you, and type them into the chat box and I will share them. All right, we've got some great suggestions coming in. Hobbies, picked up watercolor, sewing, and home improvement. Ooh, I love that. I've always said that my backup plan for a career is to be a house painter. I find painting to be incredibly soothing because you know when you started the project and you know when you're finished because the wall is a different color. Unlike working with folks, working with people, the work is really never done. So I love that. This person says, I recently downloaded an app for at-home Pilates. It keeps me moving while at home, and I can do it with no equipment. Yeah, I think any form of exercise, and that's one great aspect of technology, is we have so many resources now. You don't have to go to a gym, and you can find whatever works for you, if it's yoga or Pilates or running or strength training, or just taking a walk. It doesn't have to be a lot. Listening to music or podcasts while walking after work, great suggestion. Nowadays, I like to go outside and just spend maybe 15 minutes taking time in fresh air. Oh my gosh, so important. The walks have saved me and my family, just being able to get outside and get some fresh air and a different view other than these four walls. I keep my work in a designated space while at home and pack it up at the end of each day, my way of checking out of the office and back into home life. Oh, I love that. Great suggestion for working from home. Yeah, as much as you can, try to keep those boundaries in place. It's really hard when you're not leaving an office space at the end of the day and getting into a car and getting home. It's easy to just keep working. To keep up those boundaries, limit the number of hours you're putting in. Let's see. Walking outside and just breathing, cooking, coloring. Let's see. Enjoy planting flowers and watching them grow. Very relaxing and no outside demands at the times of planting and digging in the dirt. Sharing humor with coworkers, taking a walk in nature, park trail or hiking trail, keeping an exercise routine that is fun. Gardening, riding my bike, keeping my grandsons and playing with them, baking, cooking, reading, watching trashy TV. Yes. attending my church, reading devotions, listening to good podcasts, calling one of my BFFs from out of town. Love all of that. I am a writer / singer and a local performer. How cool. That's a big part of my self-care. I've been participating in a lot of virtual open mics to maintain self-care and motivation to be creative. Love it. Puzzles. Yes, I love puzzles too. Downloaded the Calm app and it's been helpful. Yeah, I've heard a lot. I don't have the Calm app myself. I have a different one, but I've heard really great things about that app. Nature walk. At home, I enjoy bubble baths or shower karaoke. Yes. Home improvement projects and also playing Fortnite with my sons. LOL. Yes. Never too old to play games with our kiddos. Oh, we have a question. Would the person be able to share the names of the virtual open mic? If you're willing to share that and you type it into the chat box, I can share it with everyone, or I can share it in the email that I send out. Aromatherapy and regular therapy. Yes. As I said at the beginning, I have a therapist. There is no shame in that. Just like going to a regular doctor, checking up on your mental health is so important. Thank you for all these great suggestions. So the thing to remember is that your definition of a good day will look different from other people's. For this little chickadee here, they slept 6 hours and cleaned their room and took a walk. For this busy little pink bunny, they finished 2 tasks in the morning, scheduled next week, feeling highly productive. For the hedgehog, they hung out with friends, laughed a lot, and they're full of food. I'm feeling the hedgehog right now. And for the little bluebird, they read a book, learned a cool fact, and didn't worry too much. So again, self-care looks different for all of us. And the other point I'd like to make is when you're considering about what is the source of the symptom for you, if we're talking about burnout because of something happening in your organization, the thing that I get frustrated about when we talk about self-care is that oftentimes it's just put on the individual. Like if you took enough walks and enough bubble baths and did enough yoga, you wouldn't be burned out. Remember that if the problem is coming from issues within the organization, that's not your fault. You are responsible for letting someone know if it's not something they're aware of. But not everything about preventing burnout and compassion fatigue is up to the individual to fix. So again, we have to find that balance. Are you taking care of yourself? Are you building habits and practices into your job and your life to take care of yourself? Those are our individual responsibilities. There are also going to be things that are the responsibility of the organization itself. And those are things that we may or may not have control over, and that can be frustrating when you recognize that these are problems, but that you can't fix. There could be a lot of reasons why maybe you don't have control over that. If that's the case and you want to talk it out, you're welcome to email me or call me. I can't promise that I can fix it either, but I'm happy to listen and brainstorm ideas with you. If you're the leader of an organization and you see some of these things going on, we have a lot of resources and tools that we're happy to share as well. Some more self-care ideas. Debrief with people who can validate you. Who are your go-to folks when you need to vent or unload? And remember that it's not healthy if the person you're venting with is never solution-focused. Now, I have the same problem a lot of women have where I go to my husband to vent about something and he tries to fix the problem and I'm like, look, I don't want to fix it. I just want to vent. And that's really important. However, if we get stuck in this place of negativity where all we do is complain and we never look for solutions, that's not really healthy. So find people who can validate you, but who also encourage you to be solution focused. Clarify your boundaries, what works for you and what doesn't. Learn that it's okay to say no if you need to say no. Try health building activities such as exercise, meditation, healthy eating, drinking lots of water, getting sunshine and fresh air. And regularly use your vacation and sick time. As I said, those days are there for a reason. They're there for you to use. Alrighty. Some other ideas to consider: finding a spiritual outlet. And that, again, can look different for different folks. A good habit to get into is when you have a problem, if you can, take it to the source. It's important not to let conflict fester, and to let our fear of addressing conflict contribute to causes of burnout or compassion fatigue. And so part of what we're encouraging you to do is, if you're unhappy at work, take action. For me, making that shift from working on the front lines as a case manager to working on the macro level, on the state level, allowed me to stay in the work of domestic violence, but get the break I need to step back from working with survivors directly for a little bit. So I was really grateful for that. And I know that's not going to be possible or realistic for everybody to make that kind of shift, but always consider what shift can you make to improve your work situation. Avoid overcommitting to responsibilities and tasks. That's easier said than done. And again, negativity is easy to catch. Try not to spread it or catch it. Spend your time venting when you need to, but also spend some time looking for solutions. And develop a healthy support system. So here's another little cartoon to share with you guys. This gentleman is saying, I moved the computer and phone off my desk. You wouldn't understand. It's a feng shui thing, and it has successfully reduced my job-related stress. So I love that. Yeah, if we didn't have phones or computers or paperwork, there'd be a lot less stress. So I know we can't necessarily just clear everything off our desk, but maybe we can take one thing off our plate to manage our workload a little bit and take care of ourselves. All right. So I'm going to leave this up for just a second. We have just a few more minutes left, and I wanted to take a few minutes to talk with you all about the resources that I shared with you. It's one of your handouts on worrying. So I'm going to open that. This is what it looks like, living with worry and anxiety amidst global uncertainty. And it's just a really great guide. And it talks about what does worry feel like? And I know for me, and I've seen some things online about this, that when coronavirus cases really started to increase, and everybody started to think, oh gosh, like this isn't good, this is serious. And then suddenly we were all making a decision to work from home. That first week, I still felt pretty good. I was thinking, well, actually, this isn't too bad. I don't have to commute in Atlanta every day. That's nice. And, I get to not have to change out of my PJs at 7 a.m. and rush out the door. And, maybe this will be relaxing. And, hey, maybe I can get some of those home improvement projects done. course, I have two children that are now 4 and 8. So I've been a homeschool teacher in addition to an employee. So that's been incredibly overwhelming and stressful. So the reality of that all came crashing in pretty quickly. And by the third week, I was no longer feeling optimistic and sort of zen about the whole working from home thing. And, that's how worry can happen for us. It doesn't show up overnight. And I know for me, it was showing up in my body in a lot of different ways. And it's similar to burnout and compassion fatigue, where we can have physical symptoms that we're not necessarily even connecting to that worry, or really we're realizing the impact of a current situation. And so it can be tension, restlessness, not being able to sleep at night, having difficulty concentrating or feeling fatigued. There's been a lot of conversations right now about it's just hard to be productive right now. And so this worry chain, if you take a look at this here at the bottom, worry can get out of control really quickly. We can go from, oh gosh, I have a headache. And then it's, what if it's the coronavirus? And then it's, what if I passed it on to everyone at work yesterday? And then it's, everyone will pass it on and die. And just as we worry, the worries get bigger and bigger and bigger, and they move from the realistic worry of having a headache to the excessive worry of imagining this apocalyptic outcome of us having a headache and going to work. And just one person shared in the comments, that's how many of us feel as well, trying to do a full work day at home while homeschooling our children. It's hard to have work-life balance during this time. It really is. And, that's why I wanted to share this resource with you guys and have this conversation. I didn't want to have a self-care webinar and not acknowledge the extraordinary, extreme situation that we all find ourselves in right now. Self-care has never been more important. And I also think that it's never been this challenging, because we are on the front lines. You guys are on the front lines. Those of you who are still going to work in shelters, still providing services, still figuring out how to get, protective orders signed by a judge. Gosh, we worked with enough boundaries and barriers to helping survivors before there was a global pandemic. So I just want to acknowledge that and say that, it's, if you are feeling overwhelmed, if you are feeling beyond stressed right now, that is completely understandable and normal given our current situation. So, and as this article talks about, what are some things that trigger worry and anxiety? It's when things are ambiguous, so open to different interpretations. Do we wear masks? Do we not wear masks? Should I wear gloves in the grocery store? I saw one lady in the grocery store recently who had gloves on but not a mask, and I couldn't help but have my own judgment come up of like, okay, that's the opposite of what you're supposed to do. But, we keep getting different messages every week, it seems, or even every day, as far as what is the right thing to do or not do. Another thing that can trigger worry and anxiety is things being novel and new. So we don't have any experiences to fall back on. And we certainly don't in our lifetime right now. We've never gone through anything like this in recent years. And it's unpredictable. It's unclear how things are going to turn out. And these manifest in different ways, different types of worries. So again, it's real problem worries. They're about actual problems that need solutions right now. And then there are hypothetical worries about, worst case scenarios, what they call catastrophizing. So imagining the absolute worst thing that could happen and worrying about that. So worry becomes a problem when it's getting in the way of you living the life that you want to live. I mean, this whole situation is getting it in the way of us living the lives we want to live right now, and that is the reality. So, um, but again, if you are just so exhausted that you can't get out of bed in the morning, if you stopped eating or you can't stop eating, if you're not sleeping at night, if you're just feeling that constant stress and anxiety, even in the midst of this crisis, there are still things that we can do to manage excessive worry and to take care of ourselves. The good news is they're not that different from all of those fantastic suggestions that you guys just gave on preventing burnout and compassion fatigue. And again, maintaining balance in your life is so important. So all of these practices that we have, all of these tools at our fingertips, like going for walks or downloading that Pilates app or the meditation app or, singing in the shower or singing for real on a virtual platform, those things have never been more important. Make sure that you're finding ways to keep that balance in your life. And, take a minute to decide whether the things you're worrying about are those real problem worries or the hypothetical worries, and try to let those hypothetical worries go. And one piece of advice that I really appreciated that my therapist gave me is practice postponing your worry. She recommended that I schedule time to worry, so that I could kind of let my brain go to all those places and fret over those things for like 20 minutes during the day. And I've spent that time, I've had my worry, and then I can set it aside, and so that it's not constantly intruding upon my thoughts or upon my day or upon my sleep or trying to homeschool my kids. And just speaking to ourselves with compassion. Worry comes from a place of concern. We worry about others when we care for them. And so this resource here has some charts, worksheets that you can fill out that will help you to practice challenging your negative or anxious or upsetting thoughts with compassion. And just practicing that mindfulness. And again, we don't have to be experts on meditation. Anybody can learn and practice mindfulness, bringing ourselves back into the present moment. So as a way to close today, in our last few minutes, I'm just going to share a little mindfulness exercise with you all. If you're having those intrusive thoughts or worrying or fretting and you just can't get back to the present moment, or even if you're starting to have like symptoms of panic, one great little technique that you can do is the 5 senses mindfulness practice. I know many of you are probably familiar with this, but it's really simple. You can do it sitting at your desk or in your car, or in bed when you're trying to fall asleep. And so you just want to identify something that relates to your 5 senses. There's different versions of this, and you can find it online. But it doesn't have to be perfect, and you don't have to remember all the specific details. So the way it works is this: you just want to try to get comfortable, sit back, put your shoulders back, focus on your breathing. Breathing in and breathing out, and calm breathing. You always exhale for longer than you inhale. And so you can count if that helps you. Take a breath in for 4 counts. And then out for 7. And so first, you want to think of 4 textures that you can see. It can be colors. What are 4 colors that you see in the room? I see an orange lampshade. I see the brown wood on the floor. I see my blue coffee cup. I see my silver laptop. Then you can identify 3 things that you can touch. So I can touch the cool desk, the cool wood desk. I can touch the soft pillow next to me. I can touch my pen and click the end, fidget with that. And then think of 2 things that you can hear right now. You can hear me talking. Can you hear birds chirping? Can you hear a train in the distance? Can you hear your family members talking in the other room? And then think of 1 thing you can smell. Are there flowers blooming near your house? Are you making banana bread? I have a neighbor that said, if you haven't made banana bread yet, are you really quarantining? So just go through that process to identify things with all of your senses, and it helps to ground you and bring you back to the present moment and take your mind hopefully off of whatever you were fretting about, even if it's just for a minute. And you can do that as many times as you need to. All right. I'm just going to go back over these questions. Any other questions before we wrap up today? We had one person who shared, for those of us that are still working, still having to go into work and seeing all the stuff that people are doing who are at home, like craft projects and baking bread, it can create a feeling of pressure. I've seen a lot of that too. So again, don't feel like you have to become Martha Stewart just because you're working from home. It is okay not to craft. Remember, it's okay to say no. You can say no to crafting too, if that's not your thing. It's a great point there too. All right. So that is it for me today. Thank you so much for joining me. This webinar was full. We do have a limit, and that's unusual. I'm just thrilled that we had such interest in this. The webinar has been recorded. I may cut off some of this end part before I put it on our training website, but I am going to upload the recording to our training website, and it will include all of the resources that I'm going to email you. So if you have a coworker or colleague who missed the webinar or couldn't join us today, let them know. I will be sending out an announcement in a couple of weeks once that recording is available on the training website. Of course, the training website is there for you guys with lots of other recorded webinars that we've held in the past and e-learning modules as well, as we're not able to host in-person trainings right now. We miss seeing you guys so much, but just know that those resources are available for you. I took some notes from folks who asked me to send resources, but if I forget or missed somebody's message and you were hoping to get a resource, please do not hesitate to email me and remind me, achampion@gcadv.org. All right, so thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your Friday. If you missed the announcement about the book club that we're having a book club on a book by Rachel Louise Snyder called No Visible Bruises, What We Don't Know About Domestic Violence Will Kill Us. I still have some stipends available to purchase copies of the book. If you're interested, email me about that as well. Otherwise, I wish you all a happy Friday. Thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you all soon. Thanks so much.